The time is now. Let's take this engine apart and see what's going on with it. Hello my friends, and welcome to Tom's Tinkering and Adventures. Today we are continuing on with the GasGas EC300 two-stroke engine teardown and inspection. We're going to find out what's going on with this engine, why it's making the noises that it's making, and hopefully we will identify that, and then we can order parts and get this thing back together. I got a little ahead of myself here. I already started. I took off the cover for the power valve here. It's just 3 bolts. Now, if you're doing something like this, I highly recommend you get yourself a bunch of plastic bags. Anytime I get parts, I always keep all these bags. I have bags full of bags laying around. So I took that cover off, put the bolts and the cover in the bag here, and I try to do that with major components. You know, like when I take the side cover off, I'll put all those bolts in a bag, tape it right to the side cover or whatever, that sort of thing. Just makes it much easier. If you get a little bit crazy, you start throwing all those bolts everywhere, you're gonna be in some trouble. We'll pull the cylinder head off. There was only really one bolt that looked like it was going to be troublesome, and that was that one. And I already got these all loosened up. Just use my impact here. We'll get them all off. Of course, if you don't have an impact wrench, you just use a ratchet. There we go. Let's see what the top of the cylinder looks like here. It's dirty, but doesn't look too bad initially. Just some crap fell in there from here, and that looks pretty normal. So I'll probably get my air compressor and we'll blow all this off of here, and then we will turn this engine all the way down, take a look at the cylinder in here. Alright, the cylinder does not look too bad. There's just some minor scuffing over here, but definitely doesn't look like the top end is the issue in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this cylinder, and to do that we need to take off these cylinder mount bolts here. There's 2 on the back. There's one underneath here on this side. You got to take this cover off of this side, which I did off camera. It's right here, and there is a nut right there. And you need to disconnect this lever that goes to the power valve. How well you can see that. It's with this nut right here. There's your power valve. Let me show you that real quick. Hopefully we can see it. Get in here so we can see it. Now we might have to show you once we get the cylinder off what that does. Basically what that does is it changes the shape of the exhaust chamber. So as your RPMs increase, this rod here is driven, I think it's like centrifugal force in the engine, and as you rev up, then that moves this and it opens or closes the exhaust port a little bit. Just changes the power characteristics of the engine. So we're going to loosen all these nuts up and we'll pull this cylinder off. All of our cylinder mount nuts have been removed, so now we should just be able to slide this cylinder off. And there's our piston. It doesn't look terrible. There's definitely some scuffing right here. And we're gonna feel if we have, well, it kind of feels a little bit worn there. And then also gonna feel for the bearing on the rod here. Yeah, that upper bearing definitely feels a little bit sloppy to me, but we'll see once we get this piston off. Now, this one has regular circlips in here. So you can see there's a little notch right here. You get in there with a little needle nose pliers, maybe with a pick, whatever you got. But one thing that you definitely want to make sure you do is put some rags in here, because if that piston clip goes flying, it's going to drop right in there, of course, because that's the most logical place for it to go. There we go. That one's off. Now, theoretically, I should be able to push this out from this side. And it's a little bit on the tight side coming out. So I'm going to pull the other piston clip out of the other side over here and see if we can't work it out one side or the other. Alright, I got the piston pin out of there. I just had to give it a little push with I put a socket on an extension, give it a little push, a little tap with the old mallet. It drove out of there pretty easy. Now I put the upper bearing onto our piston pin here, and there's a little bit of play on that. And we put this all back in here. There's definitely some play there. It's kind of hard to isolate it, whether it's all in this or if it's down here as well. Exhaust side definitely has some wear. Intake side, it's the same. The cylinder doesn't look too bad. Piston pin doesn't look terrible. A little bit of play in that. We do definitely have some, you can see it pretty well right here. Our side to side play. Up and down, I don't really feel a lot. There's a little bit. And I think there's a little bit of slop up in the, well, maybe it's not even so much up in the top. It's kind of hard to isolate it. Up here feels pretty good. Down there we got a fair amount. All right, before I get going too much farther on this thing, I wanted to make sure I had a flywheel puller so I don't have to order one. And well, here, let me show you. I got a box of assorted flywheel pullers and stuff here. Excuse me. There we go. Over several years of messing around with stuff and knowing people, you know, I've gotten some of these gifted to me. Sometimes I work on something for someone and they just say, here, buy it and keep it. Anyway, I happen to have one that fits this, which is quite lucky because this is reverse thread on this flywheel here. So I had to reverse thread that in there. I'll hold this with a crescent wrench. See if we can do this on the screen here or not. And then I've got to tighten this down. Oh yeah, this one's going to be a bear. So I'll mess with it. We'll get this thing popped off, but do not try to pry behind it with a screwdriver. You'll mess up the case. You break the case. You'll bend this. Use a puller. If you have to purchase one and wait, they're usually not expensive, 30 or 40 bucks usually. All right, a little bit of brute force and that thing popped off. I've also removed the counter shaft or drive sprocket and the shift lever, bagged and tagged. There's the push rod for the clutch. I pulled that out as well so that didn't fall out. So we'll move over to the right-hand side of the engine at this point. Water pump cover and the clutch cover. Next, now, if you're pulling off covers, pay attention. If the fasteners are all the same size, it's no problem. But if you have numerous different sizes, sometimes drawing a little template's a good idea. On this one, we have one that's a different size, but it's going to be pretty hard to mess that up because it's only going to fit in one hole, so that shouldn't be too much trouble. All right, and there's our water pump impeller. I was looking online a little bit at some GasGas forums, and I saw that some of these have plastic, or maybe they come stock with plastic ones. Obviously this one is metal, so either it's a different year or it's an upgrade. We don't know. Likely upgraded. I mean, I like to think that my buddy who owns this thing puts all the latest and greatest goodies on his bike. But I think we're going to have to pull that impeller off to get this cover off, I imagine. All right, and here we have 3 the same and 2 the same. Once again, I'm not going to really draw a schematic for this. I haven't got 5 different sizes, so I'm not too concerned. I know the long ones aren't going to fit in the short holes. All right, so I'm going to bag and tag this stuff, and then we'll move on. All right, now we're going to get under the clutch cover here, side cover. So I'm pretty sure I got everything loosened. We'll give it a couple of taps with the old dead blow hammer. It's already breaking loose on this side over here. Oh, and I did take the impeller off. It came off pretty easily. Don't want to beat on it too much. Sometimes there's some little tabs you can get behind, so what you want to try to avoid is getting screwdrivers in here and prying on stuff. Every once in a while, if you have to do it, you can, but you got to be very careful. There's probably a locating dowel over here that's kind of holding us up. It's coming loose. There's a little gap over here now. Another thing you don't want to do, let me try to get this whole thing in here, is like if this side is coming loose, don't pull it off like that. You want to try to pull it off straight. You just never know what you might break, and stuff like this isn't cheap, and of course, even if it is, usually you got a weight on it. Yeah, very nice underneath here. It looks like we didn't have to pull that impeller off, so if you're doing this and you don't want to remove that impeller, you don't have to. And well, the gasket didn't survive, but that's okay. We're going to replace all the gaskets anyway. Sometimes it's nice to save it, and then you can set it in your stuff for a spare. All right, and this is our power valve unit here, however that works. You can see it has a weight here, so like I said, I imagine it's centrifugal, how that works. As it speeds up, that moves. And anyway, we will get started, probably take the clutch off first. So that's going to be all these. We'll pull all the clutch pressure plate and all the discs and stuff out, and there should be a nut in the center. So we'll get that off, and then we'll move on. I would say that this, at least this clutch has been apart one time, because of the way that this looks, it looks like it's been used more than once. A little locking tab on the clutch. So that just tells me that at the very least this clutch has been out. I don't know about the rest of the lower end, but likely that that's been apart. All right, when it comes to removing these nuts, if you have an impact wrench, piece of cake. If you don't, they sell a pretty cool tool that's not very expensive. It looks like a vice grip, but it has arms. Open it up and it'll hold the basket, so you can get it off without an impact wrench. And then also when you put it back on, I mean, you can zip it down till however many ugga-duggas you like, but if you have that tool, then you can actually torque it. So now this should all come out here, and we will make sure we get all the bits and pieces. There's a, well, let's see, there's a washer behind here. Yep, so you got washer behind there, and you have a sleeve and a bearing here, so all that goes with the clutch. I usually just reassemble it kind of the way it came apart, and then put all that in a bag. All right, now I'm going to disassemble some of these items over here. We have our kickstart gear, which I think that probably just pulls out. Usually that's how those work. Let's see here. We got a little spring action there. There we go. So it's got this arm on it. You got to make sure you get that behind here when you put it together, and then of course load that spring up. I've messed them up a time or two. This looks like it's just held on with a circlip. Your trusty circlip pliers, and then make sure you have that thing fly across the room. Little idler gear here, and a washer. No washers behind it, I don't believe. There we go. All right, we'll bag that up. And here's our shift lever. I'm pushing that out from the left-hand side. Take that out. And then there's a detent here for our shift drum. And we'll take that off. This engine is pretty well laid out. I'm using a 5mm Allen, and that takes apart about 90% of everything. This also has a spring on it, so make sure when you put this back together you have the spring loaded in here correctly. There you go. That's going to be fun to put in there, I can tell. Spring gets tucked behind there. There you go, probably like that. And then this goes on the case. So be careful putting that together. All right, it's time to bag and tag all that stuff, and then we'll move on to the crank nut and then our power valve item here, which I'm not even sure how this all comes apart, but we'll figure it out. Okay, that was just literally take these two bolts out, pull this out, and you can see how it fits in there together. It just pulled right out of here. So it's very simple. Easy day. Now, if I remember correctly, this is reverse thread. So we're gonna have to clockwise to take it off. Impact wrench made short work of it. It absolutely is. Righty-loosey. So I got a pretty good story on that. When I was a kid, I was trying to take off some lug nuts on an old pickup, and it was on the driver's side. I didn't realize old vehicles, a lot of old vehicles, have reverse thread on the left-hand side, and I just couldn't get them off. And my dad had to point out there was a big L for loser stamped in the end of the lug nuts. And then recently my friend just found out that left-hand front spindles on Volkswagens are left-hand thread after he tried to loosen it with his impact wrench until it stripped out. So there you go, we got that off. Continue order of operations here. Okay, it's like a counterweight. That's pretty cool. And then we have a Woodruff key here. We'll get that out, and then we're about ready to split these cases. I've removed the ignition under here. It was just 2 bolts. It's slotted, so I just marked it with a marker to get it where it's supposed to be. So however you decide to do that. I've loosened all the, what I think is all the case bolts, but then I looked in here and there's one hiding. So, oh look, there's another one I didn't even get. So pay very close attention when you get to this point, when you start to get to the point where you're going to be splitting the case. You don't want to just start beating on things or prying on things, that sort of thing. Check to make sure you got all the screws. And this one has at least 3 different sizes, so I'm going to draw myself my little road map on a piece of cardboard, and then we'll get to splitting. I'm not much of an artist, but there's our road map. And I pulled the bolts out, and I just gave this a little tap right here, and our case is already splitting apart. Now, they sell a really nice case splitting tool that you can use, and I've had several of these that are really a pain to get apart, but most of the time they're not too bad. So if you want to use the case splitting tool, then by all means get it, but a lot of times they'll come apart pretty easy. Like I said, if you have to beat on something hard with a hammer, then chances are you're doing something wrong. Now, these also have locating dowels. You can see one right there. They get rust in them, so that's kind of where the case splitting tool is kind of nice to have. Another thing you can do is if you have numerous size bolts, like extra long ones, you can thread one of those in and then tap from this side using something soft. I have a brass drift, and that'll kind of break them apart. So we'll get it apart. I'm going to do it this side off, try to keep all the transmission bits in this side. We'll see how that goes. Found out what our problem was. There we go. Our main bearing. I think it was just kind of being held in just with the crank here. So as soon as I pulled it apart, all these bits fell in here, but it doesn't look like anything else has been contaminated by that. So I imagine that my buddy got severely lucky. All right, that's great. It's always good when you find out what the problem was. The other side bearing doesn't look too bad. Of course, it'd be silly not to replace it and also replace the crank seals, but looks like we're putting a little bit of heat into here. Well, maybe that didn't even heat. Maybe that's just oil, but definitely wasn't doing us a favor running on that bearing, and I think we got really lucky. He wrote it a couple hours, he said, making noises like that. So I've already checked to find that we have all the pieces, and we do. All the pieces have been accounted for. I'm going to probably try to take these all out of here, though, just to quadruple check. But, I mean, this was super lucky that nothing got into the rest of the system and ruined it. One of my favorite parts about getting a job to this point is boxing it all up, closing it up and ordering parts, cracking a cold beer. Cold beer tastes so good after a job like that. Well, I really enjoyed working on that engine. It was actually well laid out and easy to work on, and we found the issue with the engine. You know, sometimes you take something apart and you're not 100% sure of what was causing the problem, but it's nice when it basically falls into your lap like that with that bearing. All right, if you're enjoying my content, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and if you're not already a subscriber, please consider doing so. Remember, it's absolutely free of charge. Thank you very much for watching. Get out there and find your adventure. Adios.